Hi, this video is designed to help you think about the progression of assignments in the middle of this Go on Public Wiki unit. So we know that ultimately you're going to end up with a wiki that looks like this, a web page that's on a major topic related to the workplace. Each individual group member will write a portion of that. You will have your overview, and then the group members will take control of parts, and you'll just write those individually. So let's say you click on this, it'll take you to a part of the wiki that a group member has written. So you might be asking, how are all these pieces that we're dealing with now relating to that? I'll help explain that to you, because right now we're trying to track the conversation. We're thinking about the specific topics we selected in our groups and how we can get into them enough to realize what the most significant parts are. We got that research, identifying good sources, that's what you just posted. You have the conversation, identifying relevant points. Then there'll be a quiz on communicating across cultures. Then you actually start writing your section of the wiki. But again, right now we're just tracking the conversation. As you go out and find these articles and summarize them, you're starting to realize that with those issues, anything you're writing about, there is an ongoing conversation. Just because you're jumping in right now doesn't mean other people haven't been talking about this for years or decades. So you want to take your time to listen. Just like if you were in a communication with people face to face. You wouldn't walk into a room and see 20 people talking and just start talking. You take time to listen. You want to see what they're talking about, who's saying what issues are relevant, how they're supporting their points. There are all sorts of ways that we go about getting into these conversations. If you jump right in without understanding at first, people consider you rude. But in writing, a lot of students don't feel that same way. So we're taking the time to stop and just reflect on what other people have read so we can understand where the conversation's going. If you go back and think about those summaries, the goal of them is to find relevant and credible articles on that topic and then start to track what they're talking about. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to have an ongoing example with the wage gap in the workplace. So if you look at that, we have two articles here. They're both credible. They both cover specific aspects of the issue because people are talking about very different things. They talk about the wage gap. This one article is talking about the role of motherhood and how women going into the workplace, having children, and leaving the workplace somehow might suppress wages a bit and lead to at least a part of that wage gap. Some people are writing about the role of race and how it might just be discrimination or other circumstances related to race or ethnicity that might be factored into that wage gap or the reasons why people are paid less or why women are paid less. So as you start to look at those summaries, you want to start doing that. Tease out the specific places that people are focusing, because even though you might look at all these articles and say, oh, they're saying the same thing, they're not all saying the same thing. Even if you have multiple articles writing about the role of motherhood in wage suppression, they'll be talking about it in different ways. Maybe looking at different occupations, they'll be at different times. There will be some variation about them are different because every individual contribution is unique. And people don't want to just repeat what other people have said. They're trying to build on what's been said before. Your job is to identify those relevant pieces. So then we get to the next assignment. The next assignment is asking you to start to think about those big pieces, those recurring ideas or themes that come into the conversation. You have either 16 or 20 articles, depending on the size of your group. And you're going to want to look through all of those. So you're going to need to read your peers' work. You're going to want to look for what those common recurring points are. I start to see the role of motherhood as I'm reading a lot of articles. That's possibly one recurrent one. I start seeing the role of race as I'm reading these articles. That might be another one. There are going to be many main points that are repeated in these conversations. Your job isn't to ultimately write on all of them. You're going to write on 4 or 5 depending on the size of your group, but you want to see how big the conversation is and start to pick the ones that are most important. In your top proposal, I said, don't presuppose you know where the conversation is going. That's what I meant. I really want you to read the articles and see what people are saying, because you might find that they are either talking about different issues than you thought or talking about the issues that you thought they would, but in different ways than you thought they would do it. As I go through and look at this issue with the gender wage gap, I start to see a few themes popping up over and over again. Laws and the role of legislation in preventing the wage gap. Explanation of what happens if the wage gap is reduced. People projecting ahead to the future. Explanation of what constitute wages, because there are a lot of ways that people get paid, and that suppression can happen in a bunch of different ways. Then there are lifestyle factors that people are talking about. There are other forms of discrimination that are overlapping with wages. That's being discussed. And the variance of wage by occupation. So as you move from understanding what people are saying with 3.4, with 3.5, you're trying to see what are these big issues that people keep talking about over and over and over again, because that's what you need to cover in your wiki. And that's what the readers who come to a wiki are going to be expecting to know. Or they don't know anything about it. They're going to go to that wiki and you're going to tell them, hey, out of this whole universe of ideas, these are the ones that are the most important for you to think about right now. So as a group, you're going to need to read each other's summaries and start picking out what are those different issues, the snapshot of what's going on with the conversation. What you're also going to do is start to think about how people are talking about these things, because there will be some overlap potentially. You're not going to want to overlap in your wiki sections. So somebody might want to talk about lifestyle factors and somebody else might want to talk about variance by occupation, and you're going to realize that there's going to be this possibility that in a discussion of employment status, part-time, full-time, and variance by occupation, lifestyle factors might be talked about in two different ways. So those group members have to say, we're talking about the same thing, let's make sure we discuss it in the specific ways that's being discussed in these areas. Or you could say, hey, one group member, you take that, the other one, think of a different aspect of that issue. There's plenty to talk about. You're just going to make sure you don't have that unnecessary overlap. And since it is a wiki, if one person doesn't want to overlap with another, you just link to that page. There's a lot of possibilities to prevent you from doing a lot of unnecessary overlap and repetition. Ultimately, what you're going to find is that after you separate out and take those specific pieces for each group member, after you identify those main points, you're going to need to go out and do more research. And as you go out and do more research, you're going to start to see a much bigger map. So I'm looking at legislation. Maybe I decide, hey, I'm taking legislation in my group. I'm going to look at the Paycheck Fairness Act that just came out a couple of years ago. I might also look at the Equal Pay Act that was produced decades ago to talk about the differences between them a little bit. Or maybe the various state laws, because individual states have tried to rectify this issue on their own in different ways. I might decide, no, I don't want to do legislation. I'm going to do the forms of income. So maybe salary, but then bonuses, and then 401k contributions, because the salary that somebody makes kind of factors into all these different things. So these different pieces of income, you can be talking about individual pieces if you're building that wiki page. All these blue bubbles are wiki pages. All the orange things are things people could write about on the respective wiki pages. And there'll be more than that. I just couldn't fit more into my little visual aid here. But that's the ultimate goal. As you think about this, you're going to be thinking about how you can go from the summaries to identifying the main points of the group, to individual people getting those main point sections, those blue bubbles, to then individual research. It's just you writing your individual wiki page, and that's kind of what we're doing here. So again, ultimately, you're going to do the reading. You're going to identify specific wiki pages that you want to cover, those big main points in the conversation. They don't have to be these. There can be many more. It's up to the group and what you see. And then you all individually write your sections.